Well, ladies and gentlemen, the climate is much warmer, but somehow the states in the Midwest didn't get the memo. It's April, but that doesn't mean it feels like spring in many parts of the country. And apparently global warming isn't stopping the snow. Some areas could be covered by more than a foot of snow this weekend.
We think spring's been slow coming here. Can you imagine? Well, and then a severe weather system is hitting other parts of the country as well, with dangerous storms all the way from Ohio to the Florida Panhandle. Caitlin Burke has the story.
Forget April showers. Out west, it's still snow, snow, and more snow. A big storm is expected to dump 6 to 14 inches today in parts of Minnesota. And in Colorado, several ski areas are extending their season thanks to an unusually snowy spring. In other parts of the U.S. today, a wave of severe weather is wreaking havoc. Forecasters predict that violent storms will hit much of the eastern part of the country, bringing large hail, damaging winds, and the threat of tornadoes. Overnight, those storms rolled through parts of the Midwest and South. In Texas, hailstorms lasted for hours, sending people running for cover and shattering windshields.
I was telling people I don't even know what to do with the glass. Like, I've never been in this situation.
This was the view from one woman's porch, a river of hail flowing down the street. In St. Louis, more than 100 homes were damaged after an EF1 tornado touched down, causing the governor of Missouri to declare a state of emergency. And in both Kansas and Indiana, flash flooding had emergency crews rescuing drivers from submerged vehicles. Today's storms are expected to weaken as they reach the East Coast, but thunderstorms are possible from D.C. to Boston. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, there's a left-wing court in the country that we've been dealing with for years. It's called the Second Circuit, and I'm sure it's the home of ex-Yale law professors or wherever they are. But in other news, that court has now ruled that some churches in New York City may not be able to operate as successfully as in the past. John Jessup has that story from Washington.
Pat, dozens of religious groups and churches that meet in New York schools might have nowhere to celebrate Easter or Passover because of a ruling from a 3-judge panel on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The judges upheld a state ban on religious services in public schools. One pastor says he expects the case to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and he's praying the decision will be overturned. Well, the fight over churches in New York City schools has been going on for more than a decade. Charlene Aaron visited with one New York pastor who believes the churches are doing a lot of good for the schools where they meet, and he says he's committed to staying.
Pastor Demas Salaberios is one of many pastors in New York fighting for the right to hold services in public schools in the city.
There's so much prayer that's going forward. There's so many people, joining us in the fight.
16 years ago, the Bronx Household of Faith sued the city over a school policy preventing churches from holding worship services in public schools. Many have been wondering why New York City would even want to force churches out of public schools. Pastor Demas says homosexual activists are behind the push.
It was quite evident that the LGBT community stood up and said, you guys are preaching against the church, and you guys are preaching a doctrine that's against, gay marriage, and that's why we're coming against you guys to, we don't want you to have churches in schools. We're coming against you.
Churches that hold services in public schools and in community centers just like this one all across New York City say the ministry they offer is changing lives, and they are prepared to continue the fight.
We closed down the gangs in that area. We shut down drug operations. God is moving in the Bronx. He's moving through Infinity Church. I mean, it's just great people that love Jesus, and they just have wild, radical faith to see God, do some amazing things.
They hope that includes victory for religious liberty. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Pat, those churches are doing a lot of good there for their communities.
They are, and that activists, they don't care about how much good you do. It's just, do you go along with their way of life? If you don't, you're out. But the law was, there's a course called Lamb's Chapel versus Santa Maria School District that was litigated by the American Center for Law and Justice, and it was a resounding victory before the Supreme Court. And here's the deal. If a school has an open forum, in other words, if the Lions Club can have a meeting there, the Kiwanis can have a meeting there, if the Boy Scouts can meet there, if the Girl Scouts, you know, on and on. If it's an open forum, then they cannot discriminate against a Bible club or a religious group for using those facilities. That was Lamb's Chapel. It's a landmark decision. But as I said, the Second Circuit is notoriously left-wing. I went to Yale Law School, and I was under the dominance of the Second Circuit, and I know who they are and what they do. And they go against the prevailing mood of the country, but they don't care because they're left-wing ideologues, some of them, not all of them, but some are. And so this decision reflects that mindset. And the churches do an enormous amount of good, especially in those inner city neighborhoods. They give hope, they give food, they give counseling for unwed mothers. I mean, it goes on and on, the good they do. But to the left-wingers, they don't care. They don't like religion. John?
Pat, Iran's new self-proclaimed moderate president has done nothing to help the persecuted Christians in his country. According to a recent UN report, Christians and other religious minorities are more persecuted than ever. In fact, at least 49 Christians are among the 307 religious minorities held in Iranian prisons. And one of those who was put in prison is American pastor Saeed Abedini. He's serving an 8-year sentence for crimes related to his faith. His wife says he's doing better now that he's getting some medical treatment. The American pastor has been jailed for 18 months. He recently was transferred to an Iranian hospital to be treated for injuries he suffered while in prison. His wife, Nagme, told Faith Radio that her husband is finally being given decent meals and pain medication, but she says he still needs surgery. Pastor Saeed was visiting Iran to start an orphanage when the Islamic regime arrested him. To find out more about what you can do to help him, go to our website at cbnnews.com. Israel has canceled a plan to release more Palestinian prisoners. The Jewish state agreed last year to release 104 Palestinian terrorists in 4 stages as an incentive to keep the Mideast peace talks going. The announcement comes after the Palestinians renewed their push for membership at the United Nations. Israel says that's a violation of the terms of agreement for the prisoner release. Secretary of State John Kerry is urging both sides not to abandon the peace process. Pat?
You know, I said it yesterday, I say it again today, chimera. It's not going to happen. It's a fantasy. The Palestinian Authority really doesn't speak for the Palestinian people. Hamas is more of a force than the PA, and Hamas wants the destruction of Israel. And the idea of 2 peaceful states living side by side is just not going to happen. And what ought to happen is those Palestinians ought to go back under Jordanian law where they were before, and they were treated fairly and well, and they were citizens of Jordan. They could have citizenship in Israel if something could be worked out, but the idea of a separate state taking over the West Bank, taking over half of Jerusalem, it just isn't going to happen. It's a violation of the Bible. It's a violation of the fundamental principles that God laid down in His Word. And whenever a country sets out to set itself against God's Word, it gets in trouble. And we're going to be in trouble if we keep pushing this nonsense. John?
Pat, more fallout from Obamacare. It used to be you could buy health insurance at any time during the year, but not now. Many who didn't sign up during the Obamacare open enrollment period will find it impossible to buy insurance now. That's because insurers are refusing to sell to individuals after the enrollment period ended, locking out the young and healthy, as well as the sick and elderly. Some states are extending their deadlines to help those who had problems trying to meet this week's deadline, but the rest will have to wait until the next open enrollment period, which doesn't start until November. And speaking of health, if you're like most Americans, you are doing one of the best and easiest things to keep healthy, getting enough vitamin D. It's crucial for fighting disease, and as Lori Johnson tells us, if you don't get enough, it can be truly hazardous to your health.
Vitamin D, we get it from the sun, from some foods, and from supplements. But despite its abundant availability, an estimated 2/3 of Americans aren't getting enough. And that spells real trouble. A major new study of nearly 1 million people finds the lower your vitamin D levels, the higher your risk for certain diseases, including a 35% increased risk of death from heart disease and a 14% increased risk of death from cancer.
Vitamin D is nicknamed the sunshine nutrient because our bodies actually produce it when our skin is exposed to sunlight. To get enough vitamin D from the sun, doctors recommend exposing as much unprotected skin as possible, so no sunscreen, spread out over just an hour or two a week.
To protect against skin cancer, make sure you don't overdo your sun exposure. If your skin turns pink, you've been out too long. If you can't or don't want to get your vitamin D from the sun, some foods are rich in it, such as salmon, mushrooms, fortified dairy, and kale. But even they might not contain all the D you need.
Food sources are really limited, so it's best for most people to take a supplement.
Choose vitamin D3. It makes your heart healthy, improves your immune system, boosts your mood, and since you need it to absorb calcium, it strengthens your bones. But beware, even if you take vitamin D, certain things lower it from your system, such as smoking, obesity, and inflammation, which comes from things like eating too much sugar and trans fats. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
And Pat, I'm one of those who takes a daily vitamin D supplement.
That's why you're so healthy. We've been talking about this for the longest time. You know, there's an increased incidence of influenza, colds, and things like that in the Midwest states, which have rather severe winters and late springs, and lack of sunlight. And if they don't get out in the sun, they have a problem. So you can supplement. It's so easy. Those little vitamin D pills are such tiny little things. They don't hurt anybody. You can take 2 or 3 of them. You can take 10 or 15 of them. They don't hurt you.
Does your body just get rid of whatever it doesn't use?
I mean, if you get out in the sun, you can get 100,000 units of vitamin D if you sit in the sun long enough, and I mean, it doesn't hurt you. So, I mean, it's one of those things that would be very helpful. You want to be healthy? Be healthy. And I want to ask you a question, Ms. Terry.
Yes.
I gave you something yesterday.
You did. I knew you were going to ask me that.
You did. Well,
okay, so let me just explain. Yes, because you sold it so well. I had people coming by my office yesterday. No, they didn't take it away, but they all wanted to write down what it was because they were interested in it. And so I left it on the desk outside my office. I'm sure it's still there, and I'll give you a report on Monday.
It will not help you sitting on the desk outside your office.
I know. I was trying to be kind to everyone else and giving them
I wanted you to have health and happiness and lose weight and
I'm going to
lower your blood pressure
over the weekend.
and
I'm
live
going
to
do
be
all of that.
120. All right.
It's a deal. I'll give you the report on Monday.
Right. Dark chocolate, it's wonderful, but not milk chocolate. That's not good. Dark chocolate, that was 88%. That's pretty heavy.
I saw that. Yeah, that was.
That is heavy-duty dark chocolate, and that'll keep you alive.
I will give you the report
forever.
on Monday. You probably want to know if it was too bitter or swallowable.
You and I will be dancing on this desk when we're both 120.
Okay, that's a deal. Let's go.
All right. Okay.
A Pakistani court sentenced a Christian man to death for blasphemy. Last March in the city of Lahore, a Muslim man accused Sawan Masih of insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Even though police arrested Masih, a Muslim mob rampaged through a Christian neighborhood, destroying homes and forcing hundreds of Christian families to flee. Blasphemy against the Quran, Islam, and its prophet are crimes in Pakistan. Those laws are often used to intimidate and persecute Christians. Operation Blessing is providing aid for victims of Washington State's mudslide. The devastating mudslide killed 30 people in the town of Oso, about 55 miles north of Seattle. Operation Blessing partnered with a local church to provide relief to survivors and their families. They set up a communication post at the request of the pastor so residents could use the internet to connect with family and friends, as well as prepaid cell phones for volunteer administrative support. OB also provided a cash grant to help the church with ongoing relief efforts. And you can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to their website at ob.org.